October 8, 1944, Camp Shafi, Arkansas. The mess hall doors swung open, and Oberfeldwebel Klaus Weber stopped walking. Behind him, 200 German prisoners of war, freshly arrived from the port at Norfolk, stood silent in the autumn heat. They had surrendered 3 months earlier in Normandy, endured the Atlantic crossing in the hold of a Liberty ship, and processed through interrogation camps in England before transport to America. They expected barbed wire, guard towers, thin soup and sawdust bread. They did not expect the smell that rolled out of those open doors: roasted meat, fresh vegetables, butter melting on bread still warm from the oven. Weber, a veteran of Stalingrad and the Eastern Front, had not smelled anything like it since 1941. An American sergeant gestured them forward. Weber entered. The serving line stretched 20 feet long, staffed by prisoners in clean uniforms, supervised by a single bored corporal. Metal trays clattered. Steam rose from industrial-sized pots, and there, impossible and real, sat the food. Pork chops as thick as a man's palm, mashed potatoes crowned with gravy, green beans glistening with butter, sliced white bread in tall stacks, butter pats in ice-filled bowls, fresh apples, milk in glass bottles. Weber looked at the man beside him, Gefreiter Ernst Hoffmann, and saw his own disbelief mirrored. "It's a propaganda display," Hoffmann whispered, "for the new arrivals. Tomorrow will be different." Tomorrow was the same, and the day after, and the day after that. The German prisoners had come from a nation eating sawdust. By late 1944, the average German civilian ration had fallen to 1,400 calories per day. Frontline soldiers received perhaps 2,000 when supply lines functioned. In the camps behind the Eastern Front, men boiled boot leather for soup. They traded cigarettes for potato peels. The German army had become a machine that consumed itself, cannibalizing rear area units to feed combat troops, stripping occupied territories to feed the homeland, and still never having enough. Weber himself weighed 43 pounds less than when the war began. His teeth had loosened from malnutrition. He could count every rib beneath his tunic. The American POW rations, according to Geneva Convention standards, provided 4,000 calories per day. Camp Chaffee exceeded that figure. Breakfast included eggs, bacon, oatmeal, toast, jam, and coffee with real sugar. Lunch brought sandwiches with actual meat, fruit, and cake. Dinner was the revelation: full plates of protein and vegetables that would have fed a German officer's family for 3 days. The prisoners gained weight so rapidly that camp doctors monitored them for refeeding syndrome. Within 2 months, Weber had regained 20 pounds. His uniform, issued by the Americans, no longer hung on him like a scarecrow's costume. But it was not the quantity alone that shattered German assumptions. It was the waste, the casual, staggering waste. Prisoners watched American guards scrape half-eaten meals into garbage bins. They saw kitchen staff discard bruised apples, slightly stale bread, vegetables with cosmetic blemishes. Food that would have been treasured in Germany, fought over in the trenches, was treated as refuse. Some prisoners volunteered for kitchen duty simply to witness the abundance up close. They reported back with the inventory, like intelligence officers documenting an enemy's arsenal: 50-pound sacks of flour stacked to the ceiling, cases of canned peaches, barrels of sugar, sides of beef hanging in refrigerated rooms the size of a barracks. Lieutenant Heinrich Forster, formerly of the Africa Corps, kept a clandestine diary. "We were told America was soft, that its people were weak, corrupted by luxury, incapable of sacrifice. But a nation that feeds its prisoners better than we feed our soldiers is not weak. It is so strong it can afford generosity. This is the most terrifying thing I have learned in captivity." The diary would be confiscated during a routine inspection, but its contents would be noted by prisoner intelligence officers studying prisoner morale. Forster's observation appeared in dozens of interrogation reports, expressed in different words but carrying the same recognition. The food was not kindness, it was a demonstration of power. The psychological impact rippled through the camps. German POWs began writing letters home, carefully censored but still revealing. They described meals. They described waste.
Families in Hamburg and Berlin, surviving on rutabaga soup and ersatz coffee, received letters detailing pork roasts and ice cream. The contrast broke something fundamental. The Nazi narrative had promised that Germany suffered because it fought a righteous war against decadent enemies, that sacrifice would bring victory, that the fatherland's discipline would overcome the enemy's weakness. But the prisoners saw no weakness. They saw mechanized abundance, industrial-scale farming, supply chains so efficient that fresh eggs traveled 1,000 miles to feed men who had tried to kill American soldiers.
By January 1945, Camp Chaffee held over 3,000 German POWs. They worked on local farms, in lumber mills, in factories facing labor shortages. They earned 80 cents per day in camp scrip, which they spent at canteens stocked with candy bars, cigarettes, and toiletries. Some worked alongside American civilians and noted that the civilians ate the same food, wore similar clothes, lived in houses with electricity and indoor plumbing. There was no Herrenvolk here, no master race hoarding resources while others starved, just a vast, incomprehensible prosperity, distributed so widely it seemed almost mundane. The symbolism of the mess hall became a kind of scripture among the prisoners. They spoke of it in their barracks at night, comparing notes like theologians debating texts. The butter, real butter, not the margarine cut with chalk dust they had eaten in Germany, became a particular fixation. Butter represented everything. Dairy farming required vast pasture lands, grain for feed, refrigerated transport, all maintained while simultaneously building tanks and bombers and battleships. The butter on their bread was proof that America fought the war with its surplus, not its substance, that its factories ran on abundance rather than desperation. Vauber survived the war. He remained at Camp Chaffee until repatriation in 1946, returned to a Germany of rubble and starvation, and spent the rest of his life haunted by those mess hall meals. In 1978, interviewed for a documentary on POW experiences, he spoke carefully, choosing words with the precision of a man who had spent 3 decades thinking about a single truth. "We lost the war before it began," he said. "We just didn't know it. But I knew it the moment I saw that first meal. You cannot defeat a nation that considers abundance normal, that treats what we would call luxury as a baseline expectation." The food was not a gift, it was a message, and we heard it clearly. The message was simple. This is what we do for our enemies. Imagine what we do for ourselves.